There are leaders that know how to start, build, grow, accelerate. And then there's a whole nother subset of leaders that maybe aren't built as much for that as they are to go in and take something that was broken, similar to a Nehemiah going in and rebuilding something that he didn't break.
Dr. Jon Chasteen, great to have you on the podcast.
I am so honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. I got to start with the obvious question, like, how did you lead a church and serve as a president of a university for 5 years and not die?
That's a great question. I think a big part of that, not to over spiritualize it a little bit, but is the Lord was in it, right? There was a grace on it. But I think there was a big portion of that is just learning how to delegate and listening to this podcast and other leadership podcasts, but learning the concept of pushing, as you always say, push decision-making further down into the organization and just surrounding myself with great leaders and trying to get out of their way, not overcomplicate it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it was impressive to watch because you, not only was it multiple organizations, but in multiple cities.
Yeah.
And to do that well and continue to be a good husband and good dad, it was impressive to watch.
Yeah.
Along the way, we've been friends for quite a few years, and both professionally and then personally, we've done stuff together. And so we were talking away from work one time and recognized kind of a pattern in your leadership that you didn't choose it, but it seemed like you would often go into kind of like a leadership assignment that was after maybe a season of complications.
Yeah.
And we started to put language to it. You want to maybe just tell our community the story behind
Absolutely.
what you started to discover?
Absolutely. It really was a pattern that really you helped me realize is that I had been in profession for several years. I'd been a VP at a university. I'd been a pastor. I'd been a president of a university. And we were talking about launching, starting, and trying to help pastors and leaders learn how to launch and start. And I think I said something along the lines to you of, I don't know how to do that. And you said something along the lines of, well, then what is it that you do? And without even thinking, something just kind of bubbled up out of my gut with no filter. And I said, I fix broke stuff. And that just began this conversation where I began to realize that I really do think that I have a special gift set. And I think there's actually a lot of leaders that do. There are leaders that know how to start, build, grow, accelerate. And then there's a whole nother subset of leaders that maybe aren't built as much for that as they are to go in and take something that was broken, similar to a Nehemiah going in and rebuilding something that he didn't break. And so it was just a gift set, and it really was a pattern that I began to see and I began to write about and study about. And it became a passion.
Yep.
You know, it's like I'd been all of these things, and I was 43 years old, realizing that I finally know what I'm called to do. It was like a light bulb moment.
Yeah, and it was fun to be there with you when you kind of saw the light bulb. And what's interesting is, you know, so often, if you're a student of leadership, we're listening to similar podcasts, we're reading similar books, and there seems to be similar stories. I started with nothing, I took the faith risk, I built something, and here it is. And so we tend to think that's the typical model of leadership, when in reality it is a model, but there are tons and tons of varieties of what we might call leadership assignments, leadership giftings, etc. And I don't want to do too much talking, but at Life.Church, we have 45 different church locations. So if you can imagine, we have some that are less than 2 years old, and they're kind of in the startup phase. We've got some that are 25 years old and have been in a mature phase for a long time, maybe some that are growing, some that are flat, some that are declining. And for years, I kind of thought good leadership was good leadership. And it took me a while to start to recognize, no, there are actually some leaders that are really, really good at phase one. They're really, really good at the launch phase. But if you put them in a 10-year old organization that's very stable, they'll almost self-destruct.
That's right.
They get bored. At the same time, you put someone that's really good at running effectively and efficiently a stable organization, and you ask them to start something up, and they don't know what to do. Then, on the other hand, you've got some that maybe they started to struggle, and you need to bring in a totally different leadership style. And we started to call them like correction specialists. So you've got people that are launching, you've got people that are good in stability. And then you've got people that come in and, like you say, fix stuff that's broken.
Absolutely.
And the reality is we don't hear a whole lot about that. I mean, who podcast talks about that regularly.
Yeah.
And you've devoted an entire, really kind of a branch of organizational development to it. You have podcasts, you've got a book coming out. The book is, or maybe even out now, depending on when we drop the podcast, called Re-Leader.
Yep.
And the subtitle is
How to Fix What You Didn't Break.
Yeah, in fact, I'll hold it up right here.
Yeah.
How to Fix What You Didn't Break, it's a very different skill set. What's interesting is when you start something and you have problems, you're fixing the problems that you allowed or created.
Mm-hmm.
But when you come in and follow something that's not working well, you're actually fixing something that you did not break.
Yeah.
As someone who's done this multiple times, let's go kind of through the basics, Jon.
Yeah.
What are some of the first lessons that you learned that weren't as obvious to you then, but they're more obvious to you now?
That's a great question. I think when you first come into an organization, and it can be a department, right? You could be a vice president or a lawyer or a doctor or a campus pastor. Mm-hmm. You're coming into something that you didn't build, and it may or may not be broken, but you're coming into I walk through the halls of the church. I used to walk through the halls of the university and be well aware that I didn't build this. I wasn't in the planning meeting. I didn't pick the infrastructure. I didn't choose the core values. I didn't write the policies and the procedures, and I didn't hire the staff. Mm-hmm. And so you come in very aware of something. And I think one of the biggest things that a leader has to face primarily beginning is that an entrepreneurial leader can come in and be just blaze, just go. Everyone's with you. The vision has been cast. You handpicked all these people. You wrote the values, and everyone's rearing to go. And a lot of times a leader comes in and there's trauma potentially,
right.
Or there's just a history. There was somebody there before you. And so they're used to that person's leadership style. And I think I use the analogy sometimes of a cruise ship, right? So if you become the captain of a cruise ship and you've got 3,000 people on this ship, the captain may know that we're going north, we should be going west. Mm-hmm. But the best captains know how to turn the ship so carefully and so slowly that you don't throw anybody off the ship. Mm-hmm. And so the best captains know how to turn the ship and no one even realizes the ship is turning. Mm. And so leaders really have to have this ability to be pastoral or caring in a sense, while simultaneously seeing where we need to be going. The best leaders, any leader can see this is the direction we're supposed to be going. We're supposed to be going west. Mm-hmm. The best leaders know not what to do, but when to do it and how to do it. And I think that's really something that I've learned in re-leading is not necessarily what. That's usually the easy answer. How and when. And you see staff members that you wouldn't have hired. Well, when's the best time to let them go? Because they have a history. Do you know the history? Do you know who loves them and who doesn't? Do you know their history and their understanding of the organization? So there's a plethora of those sort of conversations and decisions that a leader has to make. You can't just come in and wipe the slate clean. Right. You can if you want to, but you're going to lose trust very quickly. And your primary thing is I have to build trust. I cannot move this organization forward if I haven't established trust. What's
interesting is when we first started talking about your idea together, we kind of recognized that the vast majority of leaders will have assignments like this, right?
Yeah.
Most will come in after an organizational head. Or they're going to take over a department. And sometimes they follow kind of a catastrophic leadership season.
Yep.
A lot of times they just follow an average one.
Yeah.
Just another kind of normal year. And like we recognized, on that first day we started talking about there's not many people talking directly about this, and yet this is probably the most common assignment that leaders get.
Yeah.
So you said they're going to turn it slow. I'm going to ask you some specific questions about it. Is it always slow? Is there ever a time that it can be a rip the Band-Aid off, or is it always slow? And if it's not, when would you go fast versus when would you go slow?
It's a great question. I don't think it's always slow, and slow may not be the best choice of words, right? When I use that word, maybe strategic's a better word. So let's just use the example of topics or staff or systems that are in your organization that are causing problems. Let's use this analogy of like cancer, right? So let's say that you go to the doctor and the doctor says you have stage one, and we're going to do the surgery 3 months from now. You may be like, okay, that's no big deal, right? It's stage one. We've caught it early. You could wait 3 months versus if you go to the doctor and they say, this is really bad, you have stage 4 and we're not sure how much longer you're going to live, but we can't get you in for 4 months. Well, you're going to have a major problem with that.
Right.
And so I think every situation is different, but to use the example of a staff member, let's say you have a staff member and they are just toxic and they're detrimental to the culture. Well, you certainly don't want to move slow. If it's a finance thing and you have a department that's overspending, well, you're not going to do that slow. You're going to cut that off quickly. So I do think that it's more strategic than slow, but there are certain things that when you answer the question, not what, but how and when, that's when you drill down into every single one of those situations, and every one of them is a little bit different, right? The one that I don't think, and I'd love your take on this, the one that I don't think you cannot wait on is building your leadership team, the team that's around you. I know that in both organizations that I took over, Life.Church and the university, the very first thing I did was make some pretty quick, tough decisions on my team. This is my team. I'm in the trenches with them. I am dodging bullets with them. That's one that I don't think you can wait on. I think you have to move very quickly on your lead team. Yeah.
So I want to backtrack a little bit, and then I want to come back to where we were. So let's say there's someone listening right now, and they're being recruited to come in and take over something they didn't build. So for example, I had a friend who was being recruited to pastor a church, and a lot of changes needed to be made. And I suggested, hey, for example, the church had a horrible name, one that needed to be changed. And I told him, hey, why don't you negotiate a name change if you're going to come before they're going to agree to it. And he said, oh, well, yeah, we'll get to it. Well, he didn't do it. He got hired there and he couldn't get the name changed.
Wow.
I would say that if you're would you agree, if you're being recruited somewhere, so you're not already in it, and there are significant changes, for example, can I hire my own executive team?
Right.
Or what kind of freedom do I have
That's really good.
to hire, fire? I think I would generally say, and would you agree, and you can comment on it, that if they're recruiting you and if there's a lot that needs to be changed, would you agree that negotiating what is up for grabs at the beginning is wise?
That's really, really good. I think that would be incredibly wise. And everyone may not have that luxury, right? If you're being recruited to be an assistant director of a department, you may not have the luxury of negotiating on the front end. But I do think that if you're going in primarily as a CEO, a lead pastor, a visionary position, I do think that that's very wise. And hopefully you're getting the opportunity to meet with a board member, or maybe you're getting the opportunity to meet with the board collectively, or other people on your lead team. I think that that's a fantastic advice. I
would want going in if I have the luxury of negotiating ahead of time, I would want board support. I would want, honestly, like as often as you can in writing, what is you've agreed to that can change. Because here's what I found, and tell me if you agree or disagree, that a lot of times an organization will say, oh yeah, it's not working. John, would you come in here and fix it? And the moment you start changing their idea of fixing it and your idea of fixing it is not the same.
I think that's really good advice in both of my experiences in that. One, the church, I was already a part of the organization. I was a campus pastor before I became the lead pastor, so I had some organizational awareness there. The university going in, there were some of those conversations with, at the time it was connected to Gateway Church. And so I was talking to Gateway Church leadership, talking to the university board. You really want to do that legwork on the front end, because you get in there and try to start maneuvering things and it's too late. It's too late. It's 100% correct. Yeah.
So then you're going to get in and you're going to find out it is too late. You haven't negotiated something and things need to change. Yeah. When you discover something that needs to change, what's the first, second, third step? What do you do to discern? How do you assimilate a plan? How do you communicate it? Talk to me about the how behind actually leading real significant organizational change.
Yeah, for me, both things, one of the first things I tried to change at both was I wanted to try to change the culture of both. And for me, in the context of a re-leader, I had to get buy-in everywhere. So what that looked like for me was starting in my own mind with my own vision, going on a retreat with my lead team, getting their buy-in, us vision boarding this together, coming back, depending on the size of the organization, and let's go down a second, third layer into the organization and get as much buy-in as we possibly can, so that when we have the all staff, when we meet with the event, when we meet with the constituency base, the board members, we have buy-in everywhere. And so I don't know. I'd love your feedback, Craig. I think in re-leader, again, it goes back to this concept of, do I need to move a little bit slower to get more buy-in because there's a history? Maybe there's pockets of the organization that love the old vision. They don't want your new vision. They like the old vision. And so they don't need to hear what the new vision is. They need to hear why, more of the why. And I don't know if it's quicker when you're an entrepreneurial leader and you can just go. Do you think there's bigger levels of buy-in needed on a re-leader situation than on a launch pad?
I would say this. So like in our context at Life.Church, years ago, we would do what you might call a church merge.
Yep.
And so there was a church that was struggling and they would say, can you come in and basically, can you re-lead us? And we haven't done one of those in probably over 10 years. We did several early on, and the kind of the language we started to use is actually easier to give birth than to raise the dead. Meaning if something's been struggling, we found that it was easier to go in and start something new than actually to change a culture.
Yep.
And I'll ask you about this, but first to answer your question is what I found is there are some things that have to be changed immediately.
Absolutely.
If you don't get them done quickly, you're not going to get them done.
Will.
And you almost have to pay the price, whatever kind of kickback there is. There are some things that if you don't do it now, they're not going to get done.
I agree.
There are other things that if you move them quickly, you're actually going to lose any type of relational trust and buy-in. So you have to be really strategic. You have to be really, really wise. At times you want to act quickly. Most of the time, you actually want to be more patient.
Yep.
And you want to not just cast vision for the what, but over and over again, there's the why.
Yeah.
Anytime we're leading change, you've got people that are going to be advocates, you got people that are going to be resistant, you got people that are going to be neutral. So when you give the why, you arm those who are advocates, you reason with the people that are resistant, and you move off of neutral, the people that are neutral, hopefully into a camp that make things done. So back to your situation, you see something that needs to change. What do you do? Who do you assemble? When do you communicate? What do you decide? Are you making the decision? Is it a committee decision?
Yeah.
What are your next steps?
Yeah, I like to use this analogy that helps me understand it better. Is in Silicon Valley, they kind of came up with this term, is they build it in the air. And that's really the story of a re-leader. You didn't get the luxury of being on the ground and building this airplane and saying, is everybody good? Are we going to fly? Okay, let's get on the runway and take off. It really is something you sit down in the cockpit, and this thing's at 20,000 feet, and it might be on a descent already. It might be down. I doubt that it's up and to the right. It's usually level or down and to the right. And so you have to come in and say, okay, what parts of this airplane is not functioning properly? We're not getting the altitude we're supposed to be getting. And so if you start making really big moves too quickly, you won't stay in the air. If the right wing is not functioning properly, you can't chop the right wing off and put on a new one. You have to go in and piecemeal this thing very, very slowly. And so I think it's trying to encourage, and that's why I said the lead team is so important, because you have to get a lead team that are gifted in the same general areas of being great leaders. If you're doing this work where you know it's going to take time, and you know this is a marathon, not a sprint, but you bring somebody in on your lead team that is just this gung-ho, rip the Band-Aid off quick. So I really do think that it is a process of starting with the lead team first, building that team the best you possibly can, so that they can go and do the things that need to be done to build the plane in the air. What parts of this plane are not functioning properly? Some are easy to fix because it's internally and it doesn't affect our altitude. Some things on it, you would know. Pastor Craig is a pilot. There are some things that you cannot change without devastating the vessel, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about when you are making those changes, you're working with your leadership team and you want to implement an idea. How do you cast vision? Is it we're changing immediately? Is it this is going to be a 6-month rollout?
Yeah.
What's vision casting look like toward change? I
think so much of a vision casting for a re-leader is this caring for the staff's heart as much as for the vision. And I know that in the context of the church, okay, so the church that I took over, Victory Church, my predecessor had a moral failure, great man, amazing man, still is a great man, made one mistake. And so when I come in on the heels of that, here I am needing to cast vision. I got to prove to the staff, I got to prove to the church in this context that we're going somewhere, right? There is a future for us. Simultaneously, I have to give space for these people to heal. They are reeling in pain. And so trying to find the balance between standing up on the mountain and saying, we're going, let's charge, right? Versus, hey, let's take time to heal. Let's take time to stop and to heal. And there's that process of trying to find, and this is constant balance. And on the Enneagram, I'm an 8. So it's like, let's do this today, Let's do it yesterday, in fact. So it's trying to find this crazy balance between how do I cast vision and take people somewhere, but not leave people that are wounded and bleeding.
Right.
And time heals, right? Time helps with those sort of things. But giving somebody, and I think that there's two kind of veins of re-leading, right? There's re-leaders who have to fix what they didn't break. And then there's re-leaders that might be even more difficult, that have to follow the heels of a great leader. How do you do that? How do you follow somebody that was crushing it, that was up and to the right, everything? I think that's actually way harder. By the time I get into the organization and it's broken, people are starving for vision. They're hungry for vision. And so it's a little easier. I took over the Victory Church in November of 2014. And by February of 2015, we had cast a brand new vision, new values, new vision statement, because there was a hunger for it. At the university, it took a little longer. Jack Hayford was the history of our school. Robert Morris was involved in our school. So I think every situation, that's the difficulty with re-leading, is every situation is its own animal. So many variables.
If you're following someone that fell apart, or the organization is struggling and the team is hurting, can you move them forward while they're healing, or do they need to heal first?
I think you can move them forward while they're healing. I think there's a part of their brokenness. If there was dysfunction in the organization, there was already a thirst for vision, right? So there's this process of letting them heal, but while we're going ahead and pointing to the direction that we're going, right? I think you can do both.
Yeah, I actually think that moving forward is a part of healing.
100%.
And what's interesting is in organizations I've worked with, consulted with, there are times when people, organizationally, they've lost for so long, meaning they were struggling to be profitable, they were not missionally successful, whatever it is, they've lost for so long. It's almost like they've forgotten how to win.
Yeah.
And you almost have to teach them how to win.
Yeah.
Talk to me through, what does that look like? How do you change the mindset from we're always going to struggle to we actually can have a winning season?
You know, I think, of course, I'm a pastor, so my context, from time to time, I'll use the Bible for that. And I think that there's this passage in Samuel where King David is having he's hiding in the cave of Adullam, and it says that the distressed and the disgruntled and all these hurting people were coming to him from Saul, right? And it says that they were about 400 in number. Well, what we learn later is those are the ones that became David's mighty men. And so they started as broken, right? They started as reeling in pain. And God actually used that to create an army for advance. And so I think it's very relational. I think David was relational. I think great leaders are relational. And it's hard to re-lead from not being in the trenches with your troops for a season. You know, are you in there helping bandage wounds yourself?
Yes.
And showing that I'm not just here to be profitable. I'm not just here to grow. Yes, we're here for that, but I'm here for you. And what I've learned is that the people that I bled with end up being my greatest warriors. They will do anything for me. They'll take bullets from me because when they were bleeding, I stopped and I helped bandage their wounds. And again, re-leaders have to realize that it takes time. We may not go from here to here in the time period that you think and that you hope. And that's why I love this concept of re-leading, because I think there's a lot of re-leaders out there, Craig, or a lot of leaders out there that our only gauge of success is looking at the Craig Groeschels and the Chris Hodges and the Elon Musks and the Bill Gates and the people who have started, built, and grown. And we learn so much from that. But there can be a piece of our hearts that think if we're not doing that, then we're failing as leaders. And it's just not true.
Right.
It's true. It's a lie. And re-leading is different. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just different. And we have to do it differently and be okay with it and know that that's our call. That's our call, is to help people heal while we advance.
So someone who has started from the ground up and built something, I look at re-leading and say it actually takes more skill, more patience. I have a tremendous amount of respect for it. So anyone who really is a student of leadership will know it's actually harder to turn the ship than it is to build one from the ground up. And so it's a worthy calling. It's important. I want you to talk to us for a little bit about culture. It's really rare to see an organization that's struggling that has a really healthy culture, meaning chances are pretty good the culture is going to need detoxing, is going to need some improvement, is going to need some infusion of life and health. I have some theories on this based on a lot of experience, but I'd like to hear your theory.
Yeah.
Is, first of all, like, how long do you think it takes to really change a culture? And obviously the answer is going to vary. There is no right answer,
right.
but can you do it in 2 weeks or does it take 2 years? So I'd like a little bit of gauge to kind of help maybe encourage leaders that if they're a month in and nothing's changed, that's not unusual.
No, it's not.
So I want to know a little bit about how long does it take and what do you typically do? Where do you start when you recognize this is not the culture that we want or need? And so we want to start moving it in that direction. Just unpack some ideas on that.
So I would say, again, every one of them is a little bit different, but in my experience at both the church and the university, it took me about 3 years. And for some, that's super depressing right now. And for some, that's very encouraging. I remember when I first became the pastor of Victory Church, I called a friend of mine, Brady Boyd, who had taken over New Life, and he was a re-leader. I asked him how long it took him to change the culture of New Life, and he said 5 years. And that really discouraged me in the moment. But I really do think it takes time. What I like to do is, one, I really firmly believe that you have to first build trust. If you don't build trust in your organization, you'll never lead anyone anywhere. Once trust is established, you can really begin to make some changes. And I like to say, and so much of my theory and philosophy on changing culture came from leaders like you and great strategy and great books. But I really do like to say it, I'm not the first to say it, if I want to change the way people think and behave, I have to change the way they talk. And so to me, that starts with core values. I have to start with redefining who we are. I remember calling you early on, and I was saying, can I make a core value in my organization something that we actually don't do yet? Because I was like, I feel like if I'm going to say this is a value of ours, we're lying because we don't do this at all. And I remember you telling me, well, you have to change the way people talk and you have to make it plain so they can run with it, right? And so we change the way people talk. We don't just write core values for the website and the wall. We write it on our hearts and we infiltrate it into the core value, into the culture.
Tell me, how do you do that? What does that look like?
So for us in the context of, I'll give you both in the church and then the university. In the church, it became, how do we make sure people are talking about this? Well, one, as a re-leader, I began coming in and speaking vision. And what I noticed is there would be certain things that I would say from the stage that I didn't even maybe realize the impact they were having until I would hear somebody talk about it in the lobby. So one time in a sermon, I said, we pray big prayers to a big God and we expect big results. And I just said it in a sermon. I didn't think about it. It caught, right? So there's some universities in the early days. It was Princeton and a lot of these universities. They would build these campuses, and then they would go ahead and build the sidewalks, right? What they realized is that they'd build the sidewalks and nobody walked on the sidewalks. People started walking the fastest way, and so there would be these. So then they started building universities different. They would build the university and they wouldn't build any sidewalks. And they would say, let's figure out where people are going to walk and then build the sidewalks where they're walking. So I don't think that's a great strategy for all of your vision, obviously. But there were a few of our values that I picked up that our church was saying is a value of ours.
Yes.
So it was a part of our culture already, and I liked it. So maybe that's unique to you re-leading. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, so it's an interesting thought, because should your values be constant? And the answer is yes and or no. Meaning there are certain things that if you don't value a few things over a long period of time, you really don't have any core identity. But I'm also a believer that if you're going to be if you're correcting something, or if you're going to be somewhere for 10 or 20 or 30 years, you might pick up a value along the way that's kind of like a discovery. Like people are walking on this path, and we said it, and now that this really matters more to us than we realized. Or there are times when you start with a value and you recognize, we're kind of just faking it. I really don't believe in it. And it's better to tell the truth and say, let's just not claim it, and we're not living it.
I think it's good for leaders to hear us say that. Like,
it is.
They think that once it's written, we can't change it. It's not like the 10 Commandments, right? It's a breathing document in a sense.
I call it unmaking a promise. That you make a promise, and then there's sometimes where you say you're going to unmake it. Meaning, like,
that's good.
For the last 10 years, we've always said this, and that was true for the time and the purpose we are. The world has changed. We've changed. We recognize some changes. So we said we're always going to do that, and we always did it. When we said we're always going to do it, now we're actually going to make a change. I'm going to unmake that promise, and here's a new one, new direction. And so we don't want to do is we don't want to ever not be true to our word, but we also don't want to box ourselves in with naive statements early on. Most younger leaders tend to speak in absolutes.
Yep.
And once you do it for a while, you learn to
Right.
like soften your language a little bit.
Right.
And so I had a lot of absolutes that over time I had to say, hey, that was absolutely true during a season.
Yeah.
And if we don't recognize we're in a different season right now, we're going to underutilize the opportunities that we have in front of us.
Yeah, I wonder if creating culture and changing culture, I know that in the church context, I would think that it's a little bit easier. I have this captive audience every single weekend. I can get up and I get a microphone and they're just sitting there listening to me. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the business world, imagine a businessman or woman who has 3,000 staff mm-hmm. and they're all over the country. Right. And you're not having this captivating moment. And how do I change the culture within my organization? At the university, it was a little bit different, right? So I've got students everywhere. I've got faculty and staff everywhere. How do I change the culture? And so for us as a leadership team, we went through a book. You'd be familiar with it. I can't remember the author, Made to Stick.
Mm-hmm. Chip and Dan Heath.
Chip and Dan, yeah. Mm-hmm. So we went through that and said, okay, this needs to be so sticky that when we roll it out, they want to adopt mm-hmm. these core values. Mm-hmm. And so we went away as a leadership team. We come back, we meet with our second tier of leadership team. We have an all staff where we're going through every step of the process so that everyone has buy-in. Mm-hmm. Once we came back with 8 core values, we mm-hmm. chiseled it down to 7. Mm-hmm. And then we went to our marketing team mm-hmm. and we said, hey, we're old. We don't know what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Help us make this sticky. And they actually took 7 down to 4. Mm-hmm. We call it our core 4. Mm-hmm. With icons, we got them down to one word, mm-hmm. one word. And then under that one word was a couple of key things. Mm-hmm. And that stuck. Mm-hmm. It stuck. Mm-hmm. So I think the church, I would think, you could correct me, I would listen to you because you're Craig. I would think that the church world you approach it a little bit different than other contexts, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. In the church world, you speak to the same congregation for the most part week over week. Yeah. And then if you take a massive business organization that's got 100 franchises, how do you speak deep into those teams when they may not even know the name of the CEO, the employees that are working there?
So true.
And so there's advantages and disadvantages
yeah.
of both. On the culture part,
yeah.
you mentioned something that you just said in passing that is super, super valuable. You said, we all read a book together.
Mm.
And one of the fastest ways to move people in the same
yeah.
direction is to give them a common experience
yep.
or common language.
Yep.
And one of the most underutilized tools that I've seen in leadership is reading a book together. Or watching a podcast.
Watch this podcast together.
Yes. And discuss it. Or going to an event together. And sometimes it's not even what the speakers say at an event. It's what happens on the plane ride there or the drive back.
Yep.
But as often as you can, you want to expose people to an idea together.
Yep.
And it's not that you're explaining, hey, I read this book and here's what I read, but we read it together, chapter by chapter, page by page, and then discuss it. And that's a way, like literally, we have massive values and massive systems in place. I can name the book and the year that we read it that changed everything. You said Made to Stick. Are there any other books in your mind that stand out as books that have helped shape your team organizationally over time?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of the classics. I know when we were at the church, when we were really wrestling through staffing, we really leaned on Collins, Good to Great, and and I think that's a great book for re-leaders because you're hopping on a bus that's already full, right? And so you're hopping on buses going, who's in what seat? I know for me, when I stepped in, there was a lot of people that I didn't fire, but I just realized really quickly that they're just in the wrong seat.
Yep.
They're just in the wrong seat. And I love what you said about teams doing things together. And what I thought of when you said that was even in the context of working out, right? So if you worked out your same muscle the exact same way over and over again, you're never going to grow. And so I love it on the rare occasion now that we get to work out together. I work out with you. You work out different than I work out, and so it stretches me in a different way.
Consistent variety.
Yes,
what I call it. Consistent.
And we
variety.
get in ruts. We just do.
Yep.
We just do. We don't see what we don't see, and sometimes it just takes getting on a plane, going to a conference, and it's not the session maybe at the conference that you're going to grab it. It's at the hotel that night when you're sitting around and you're realizing you're seeing things together.
Yeah. And when you're trying to lead change, sometimes it's similar to parenting. Like as a parent of 6 kids, I can't tell you how many times, John, and you probably can agree, you tell your kids something that it'd be in one ear and out the other. And then someone else says the very same thing, and they're like, oh, my youth leader said this. And they're like, I've been saying that
for
and
years.
So that's the same thing. One of the greatest ways to bring in new ideas is to have someone else bring in the new ideas.
Yeah.
Bring it in through a book, bring it in through a podcast.
Yep.
And then it's not you saying it as the boss is just trying to get your way.
That's right.
It's actually someone that the whole organization respects.
That's right.
I want to talk to you about qualities of leaders, because there are going to be certain makeups, mindsets, patterns, experiences. Some people are like better at re-leading, rebuilding, reorganizing, revision casting, renewing, and others aren't. If I've got someone listening right now, I said, maybe I might be kind of like good at that, coming in and fixing things that I didn't break. What are some of the qualities and the best leaders you've seen based on your research?
Yeah, I think, and before I say some of them, I want to make sure and say that they bleed over, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that if you have these qualities, you're not a good leader. You're a re-leader. They obviously blend over. But I think re-leaders have a real discernment of looking at situations and being able to see things very quickly, right? And leaders have that too, but I mean in the context of looking at something and seeing where something's off. Mm-hmm. There may be somebody that can look at a puzzle and somebody's trying to put a puzzle together that's been broken apart, and they can piece it back together very quickly, like a Rubik's Cube or something. They have this ability to see things that are broken and not just see that they're broken, because that's the thing. Anybody can see that it's broken. It doesn't take a genius to see something is
they see
it's
what
broken.
It takes to make it.
What does it take to put this thing back together?
Right.
And so I think they have that quality.
And do they often see the whole, like, here's the next 8 things, or do they just see the next thing?
Usually they can see how this department is tied to that department, and if I make this change, how is that going to impact down line?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to push you in a way maybe no one has. What is that?
Oof. Mm-hmm. I'll leave it up to Craig to push me in a way that.
Like what is that? Is it a connector? Is it someone that sees patterns? Is it logical progression of thought? I like that. Okay.
I love that you gave me examples. I need multiple choice questions. I do love that there is this, I can see logically how things fit together. It's almost like an engineer.
Logical progression of thought.
Yeah.
So maybe it is. Maybe it is
it's like a deductive reasoning.
Yes.
Or an engineer can see how things go, and if that goes well, these 3 things are going to be impacted by that.
Yeah, so I think it's like I see what is likely the next 3 steps.
Yeah.
And if I'm wrong on step 2, there's actually 2 options that I see.
Right.
That it's got to be one of those 2. And then once I go to that 3rd step, then it's probably this, and it's probably going to take the 4th. But if I'm wrong there's this other option. So there's kind of like it's almost like running an option play as a quarterback. You take the ball, you read the defense.
That's really good.
And you determine, am I holding or am I
passing or handing it off?
Passing? And so it's like, I think it's like reading in real time what's taking place. Whereas someone who's starting from scratch, there's more of a blank slate. You don't have a blank slate.
No.
You got
the pieces of the puzzle right there.
Already there.
So I've got a brother-in-law, to kind of piggyback onto another one. It also takes patience. So my brother-in-law, you know people that can fix anything. They're just good with their hands. And there's people like me or you that may get frustrated really quick.
I can't fix anything. It's
I wasn't going to say that.
No, it's horrible. It's horrible.
My brother-in-law can sit down at a car that's broken. He just knows it won't start. He doesn't know why. But he has the patience to sit there for 2 or 3 hours and go to the parts store and come back. Nope, it wasn't that.
Or go watch a YouTube video and figure out how to fix it. He'll find the tools, call the right person, research online. He'll figure it out.
So is it a gift? Is it instincts? Is it patience? Yes, yes, and yes. It's a combination of a lot of different things coming together. And that's why I think it's so important for us to start seeing re-leader as a calling. It's a calling. It is a calling. The people... And a lot of times re-leaders aren't known. Their names are not in the spotlight, right? So we know who built the temple, to use the Bible again. We know it's Solomon.
Who rebuilt it.
Nobody knows. Very few people know who rebuilt the temple. Right.
So let me ask you this. Is it a natural gifting, or is it something that can be developed and taught?
It's a great question. I think that there's a portion of it that can always be developed and taught, because the truth of the matter is we're all re-leaders. We may not re-lead an organization. We may re-lead our marriage. We may not re-lead our marriage. We may re-lead my mind. the truth of the matter is we're all read leaders every day. We broke something, right, that we need to fix. I need to help someone else help fix their marriage that they broke. So we're all either re-leading ourselves, because we don't just re-lead organizations, we re-lead people.
Right.
And as re-leaders, we sometimes we need to fire staff. Sometimes they just need to be re-led. They've never been led. They've never been given a chance. And so how do I know when to re-lead a person and when to fire them?
Yep. So here's when re-leading is easier. It's difficult because you're coming in and you didn't pick your team.
Right.
You didn't build the culture. You didn't create the values. You didn't create the systems. You don't have a lot of control where the assets are invested, blah, 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 blah. There's a financial model that's already in place. That's where it's more difficult. Where it's easier is you come in with objectivity. You don't have an emotional investment.
That's right.
If there's a player that's underperforming, you didn't hire him or her, and so you're not as emotionally invested in them. How can you take that mindset into your marriage or into your parenting?
Yeah.
To where you're in a situation where you're actually so close to it that you lose objectivity. How can you take the lesson from re-leading, the objectivity you get, and apply that to other areas of your life?
I think it's, you would never want to say this in a counseling chair really to give advice, but for the context of what we're saying, you almost focus on the brokenness. You focus on realizing that this thing is broken. And it's broken to the point where somebody's got to fix this. And I believe that I'm called to do it. And so it can help bring this objectivity of, you know what? I'm going to have to make some hard decisions. I'm going to have some hard conversations, not because it's going to be easy, but because this thing's broken and I need to do it. There's also this thing in re-leading that is, I have an affection for those who have started and built and grown. Like if we were to interview you about the early years of Life.Church, you could tell the sacrifice and the bleeding and the sacrifice that it takes. And so there almost becomes this is my baby. It's my baby. As a re-leader, you come in and you're very like, this isn't my baby. It creates this objectivity to say, no, I didn't build this and I didn't grow this and I didn't do those sacrifices and I didn't miss my paycheck so that other people could hit payroll. And so you come in with this thing's broken and God is calling me to steward it and to fix it. And I think it's not the re-leader's job to really change the reason that organization was planted, right? In our context, the Lord spoke to somebody and started it. So the Lord told them to start it with this purpose in mind. The re-leader's job is to come in and say, how can I make sure that still continues? Just because there was one mistake, just because there was a season of unhealth, if the Lord wanted this to be established, how can I come alongside for a season, whether it's a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and make sure that this organization continues on beyond me,
So I love that, we were talking when you kind of came up with this idea. I love the fact that you initiated quickly, you researched, you've kind of become an expert on this subject by studying it for 4 or 5 years, and now you're writing about it, you've got almost like daily emails, and you've got a podcast, and you've built trust with the community. That's significant. So you know how to speak to someone who is stepping in, but I also know that you have advice for the leader in there that is one step away from not being the leader anymore. Yeah. That if they don't make some changes, maybe morally they're flirting with the edge, maybe organizationally things are not working right now, and they don't have the courage to change. What I'd like for you to do is give advice to the person who's in role and in trouble so that someone doesn't have to follow them and fix it. What advice would you give that leader?
Yeah, I would say to go back to your first love, go back to the original why. And I've been in leadership long enough to know that even as in the context of a re-leader, you can get so mixed up in the weeds that you forget the original why. And even at the university, I would get so caught up in leading the team and fundraising, because that's really all a president does is cast vision and raise money, that I would need to get up sometimes and walk the halls and poke my head in a classroom and go into chapel and stop a student in the hallway and have a conversation. And every time I would go back to my office with a new sense of, okay, this is why I do this. This is my why. And I think it's very easy for entrepreneurial leaders, re-leaders, anybody in a leadership context to become so wrapped up in the day-to-day that we just forget the original calling, to go back to that moment that the Lord spoke, to go back to that moment. And the other thing I would say is if there's some sort of tucked away secret sin, whatever it is, there's probably something at the root of it. And I've heard you say it, and I firmly believe it. I think the hardest person we will ever lead is ourselves. And because we can talk ourselves into anything. And I would say that anything that's brought to the light can be healed, and anything that's left concealed in darkness grows in an unhealthy way. And so I would say you have, it's funny, I just listened to the podcast the other day. I wanted to listen to it again of Sean, you and Sean, Pastor Sean. And I love his vulnerability. I love his heart. And I think that's so key for any leader to be able to be vulnerable, to be open, and to continually go back to, why did I do this? Why am I here? What's my calling? Yeah.
So when you're re-leading and you're second guessing your own abilities, what do you say to yourself?
I tell myself that this isn't about me, right? This isn't about me becoming known and me. I think that's the fight of a lot of leaders. I think what we have to do is change our definition of success. And I know for me, it all happened, again, another interaction with you, where I felt like I needed more. I needed more to do, more influence, more this, more that. And that's what makes great leaders. We want more. We want to do more. But I had to go back and redefine what success meant to me. And I have 6 things that I measure success by. Those 6 things that I know that if I fail everywhere else in life, but I'm successful here, right? If my relationship with the Lord is strong, if my marriage is strong, if my relationship with my kids is strong, and these things. So when I begin to doubt my abilities, my performance, whatever it is in re-leading, well, what is success? What is success? And am I being successful at the things that really matter? So that's my daily pep talk of trying to renew my mind. Yeah.
Because we'll all get there, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, we have to do something different when something's not working. I had a conversation with one of my kids the other day, and I was so proud of this one particular child because he or she, I don't want to give too much away, was, I'll just say he, but he was hitting his head up against a leadership obstacle. And he said, what I recognize is what I have been trying has not been working. I have to do something different. And that is such a
self-awareness.
Yeah. And there are leaders right now listening to this who've been trying to do better what's not working at all.
Yep. And you'll climb the ladder and get to the top of the ladder to realize it's leaned against the wrong building.
It's leaned against the wrong wall. But just because when you're doing something ineffective, it doesn't matter how good you do it, you got to change it. And you got to have the courage to make the change. And so I applaud you because you've made some big faith steps, and I've watched up close how you have led very effectively and not visibly, not broadly well known, but that's where a lot of the best leaders are. They're all over the place listening to this podcast right now. They don't have tens of thousands of followers, but they have very effective, loyal, mission-oriented organizations. And I love leaders like that. I love leaders that come in and do the hard work. And so the book, again, is Re-Leader. It's out early mid-January 2024, which is either already out in the future, depending on when we drop this podcast. But the book is called Re-Leader, How to Fix What You Didn't Break by Dr. Jon Chasteen. And I know there's a lot of people right now that go, I got to get more of this guy's teaching. Where do they find out about you? How do they get on your email list? Tell us where we can learn from you.
You go to releader.co, releader.co.
Okay.
Everything's right there.
You have a lot to offer, fantastic content, and more than just good content. Deep integrity and sincerity and the real life at home. So thank you for what you do. And again, a sincere thank you to our leadership community just for trusting us with a little bit of your time every month. I want to work really, really hard to bring people that will add value to your leadership and work hard to give you content that will help you grow in your leadership and help you get better. You can get better. Whatever you're leading today, you may have some real challenges, and I want you to believe that you have what it takes and the one who can help you do it with you at all times. You can do what you're called to do. If you're called to re-lead, it's going to take a little bit more patience, probably a little bit more work, some more effort, but it's worth it to build something special. Jon, thanks for being on the podcast. You helped us get better, and we know that everyone wins when the leader gets better.
Thank you.